Okay, good morning, good evening, wherever you are listening from. It's great to be connecting to you again on this particular episode, and I'm happy to do this, right? I have a wonderful guest on this particular episode, Jim. Jim is a motivational speaker with 30 plus years of experience in healthcare and technology. Is popularly known for driving transformational growth in healthcare and healthcare technology organizations, ranging from startups to leverage to large scale enterprises, rather. But most insightful for me is that he's also a leadership expert and is the author of The Six Pillars of Effective Leadership, which will form a major basis of our conversation today. So, hi, Jim. Thanks for being on this podcast. I think it would be good for us to start off with you briefly introducing yourself, and then I'm just curious around you introducing the six pillars of effective leadership and what inspired you to write this book.
Awesome. I'd be glad to. Yes, I am Jim Carlough, the one and only. Ironically, there is another Jim Carlough, but he's no relation to me. Um, I have been in the healthcare industry in the United States for over 30 years since graduating college. It was one of the first jobs I had outside of college, and I've been there ever since. Um, in the various positions that I've held, today I work for a healthcare digital engagement company, and we engage people to make improvements in their lifestyle and their health, and we measure those results by outcomes. And we're highly successful at doing that. We're one of the largest in the country, and so I serve as chief sales officer.
Mm,
In terms of my leadership skills, I've been in leadership for more than 25 years and more than 25 years in executive leadership.
mm,
Today, in today's world, kind of what got me started in thinking about writing a book was back in 2000 when I was working at Perot Systems. I had a mentoree who worked underneath me who asked me if I would mentor him. Since that time, I've mentored probably 20 to 30 different people. And one of the things that I've noticed about all of the people that I've mentored is many of them did not have business degrees, and those that did not have a lot of leadership experience. And even in my role today, as I interview people and hire people, I notice that some of them lack some of the basic capabilities. They may be able to read a customer's financial statement or
mm,
income statement,
mm,
but when it comes time to leading a team, they lack some of the basic, what I call principles or characteristics of what makes a strong leader who can develop strong and highly productive teams.
mm,
And so that was the pre-emphasis for writing the book initially. And to go along with that is speaking in terms of at conferences as well as at corporations and incorporating that theme or that roadmap into what people can soundly just walk away with and implement.
mm,
In the book itself, in each of the chapters, we go through one of the characteristics or one of the key principles, and then we give an example of that, a real world example. Somebody, for example, when we think about focus, we think about Elon Musk.
mm,
Elon is very, very focused on putting people in outer space.
mhm.
That singular focus has driven everything he has done in that segment of the business that he runs with rockets and NASA and everything else.
Yeah.
His sole goal is to put people on the moon or in outer space. That focus drives what he does. Many leaders today don't have that focus.
Mm,
No different than any of the other six characteristics that I have.
mm,
One of the main characteristics, and the one that I say is non-negotiable, is integrity.
yeah.
Today, integrity is more important than ever. One of the things that integrity leads to is trust. And whether it's an employee or whether it's a customer, if trust is not at the foundation of that relationship will go nowhere.
Mm,
That client won't be loyal, that employee won't be loyal, and that employee won't follow your direction or follow where you're taking the organization with your vision. And
mm,
so to me, integrity is non negotiable. So these six pillars all round out with opportunities for people who even are in management today to take a fresh look at some of the skill sets that I'm recommending people have and further develop them in themselves.
mm.
And in the book itself, there are exercises that people can immediately implement in order to help improve in that arena.
Interesting. Interesting. I like the fact that your motivation around this book has been your experience and also your experience in mentoring young leaders or emerging leaders. Insightful. And I also like the fact that of a truth, right? Integrity cannot be overemphasized, right? I read through your website, and one of the core messages you teach in your leadership is that leadership can be learned, right? Why do you believe in such ideology, or why do you believe that leadership is a skill that can be learned?
Well, it's interesting. It is true that my website states that, and I think that what I believe is there's a saying out there that that person was a born leader.
Mm,
Now, it is true there is a genetic capability that indicates someone has a potential to be a better leader than another. However, I'm a perfect example.
mm,
My degree is not in business management,
mhm,
not in executive management. My degree is in psychology.
mm,
Yet I've been a highly successful business leader. And the reason I've been a highly successful business leader is because I've been able to build and develop the characteristics that help bring people together and help make them stronger.
mm.
And that is again something that's desperately missing. And if I can learn how to do it, anybody can.
Yes.
Um, I would not say I'm not an intelligent person. I am, but the reality is I was not born a leader. I was
Mm,
born into a standard middle class family, five children, two parents, and very active together as a family. And they gave me the opportunity to explore, create my own ideas. One thing that was non-negotiable was we had to go to college.
yeah.
And then going to college, you got to figure out then what do you want to do after you get out of college and in life. So for me, it was part of that foundation of what do I need to do in order to be better than the last generation?
Mm,
As an example, my father, who I love dearly, who died in 2008, was a carpenter by trade. His father was a mason. Ironically, I was born left-handed, and my father had trouble teaching me how to paint and use a saw and do different things because he saw me doing things backwards. Now, I wasn't walking backwards or anything like that, but
mm,
using my left hand versus my right
yeah.
was hard for him to understand how to help me with that. And so I had to, figure out for myself over time, where was I going to be? If I was going to be a carpenter, I needed to learn how to use a left-handed hammer or
Mm-hmm,
find a left-handed hammer.
mm-hmm,
And I don't even know if they make a left-handed hammer. But the reality is, I'm a perfect example of someone who wasn't born a leader, but developed the characteristics to be a great leader.
mm, mm. Thank you so much. Your explanation have always been influenced by your personal life, and I like the fact that your personal life have also influenced largely your leadership philosophy, right? I do a lot of work mostly with emerging leaders, young leaders, especially young people on campus who are aspiring to be leaders, whether in the private sector or in the public sector. So I'm going to ask if you could focus on, because you've talked about integrity, you've talked about focus, right? As and using Elon Musk as an example, if you could focus on only one pillar for aspiring leaders, right? I know you talked about six pillars, but if you could focus on one, which would it be and why?
It would be the integrity. Integrity to me is non-negotiable. If you are not straight as the arrow can fly
Mm,
in every decision that you do, I'll give you I'll give you an example of where that came from, or my belief. When I was 22 years old, I ran for a local political position in the town that I grew up in New Jersey. Only 13,000 people in the town,
mm,
but I ran for a city council position and I won.
mm,
And then I was reelected 3 years later. But after I won that in that first election, the city manager asked me to stop in and have a cup of coffee with him. Now, I don't drink coffee, but I went in and I sat with him. And he said to me, and his name was Don, and he said, Jim, he said, congratulations on winning the election. In fact, I wasn't the only one. There were a couple of other running mates that won also, but I was a first time runner.
mm,
And he said, you're a very smart individual, but I want to give you just one piece of advice. He said, and if you can follow this piece of advice, not just in politics, but in everything in life, you will always be successful. And that one thing was when you go to bed at night and you put your head on the pillow, and before you close your eyes to go to sleep, ask yourself the following question. Did I do anything today to benefit myself at the expense of another individual,
mm,
where that could have done financial or personal harm to that individual?
mm,
And if you can say, no, I did not, then you had a successful day.
mm,
Do you know I do that to this day every night? And
mm,
I've never had a day when I've said yes.
mm,
And so that to me is flying straight as the arrow will fly
mm,
and not wavering from that.
mm,
So to me, integrity is has to be unwavering and something that you've got to be very focused on, and your team has to understand that, because if you lose that trust with your team, they are not going to follow you.
mm,
Now, if you are a military general and you lost the trust of your men, they would all walk away from the battlefield, and you wouldn't be able to, that would not make you a success either, and the results of that could be detrimental. The same goes for business.
mm,
You have to think about the greater good of what you're doing with your products and services. And today it's different than it was probably back in the 90s, when more people had what I call vaporware, software products that weren't fully developed, that they were trying to sell. There was a lot of that in the United States. There's less of that today as a result of the evolution of both technology, but also people realizing that you can't sell vaporware. Today, a business decision, the number one thing people make a business decision on is whether they trust you or not.
mm,
You don't have to have the cheapest product. But today, more than ever, if you make a decision to bring me in and to service your organization,
yeah.
and we fail you, you're more at risk for your job today than you were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or even 30 years ago.
Mm, mm, mm. Interesting, interesting, Jim. Interesting. I mean, the example from the public sector and how it has even shaped how you, the question you still ask yourself to date, and you have never faltered in those questions. Very, very insightful, especially because it's very easy for people to lack integrity within the private and public sector, right? Typically, perhaps more difficult, but very easy to lack that integrity because you feel like you are serving citizens, and then you are not being really watched on a daily basis. So let's narrow a bit to business. I mean, you've written a book about six pillars of effective leadership. Do you have such like a unique story of a time where you applied all of these principles to overcome a business challenge in your 30 plus years of experience or 30 plus years career journey that you want to share?
With every single one of them, let me give you an example of one I'm very proud of.
Mm,
And that characteristic is empathy. Now, compassion and empathy are very close, but
okay.
compassion is showing concern for you. Empathy is understanding how you feel and your situation. So I'll give you an example of empathy, but I could give you an example of any of them. When I worked for Ross Perot at Perot Systems, almost for nearly a decade, from 1999 to about 2007, 2008, in the early 2000 time frame, we had a administrative platform that we sold to health insurance companies that they used to process claims. And we had two versions of that. One was an old green screen technology, and one was more state of the art Windows technology. And then we were developing a even newer one
Mm,
on top of that, that was going to be more like a Cadillac to service very big, large insurance company entities, health insurance companies. I had a team of about 30 to 40 people in the green screen technology that were engineers, that were business analysts, that were account managers, all servicing a bunch of clients that we had to tell the clients that product would be going away.
Mm,
So immediately my concern became, if my employees figure out that this product's going away, what are they going to do?
mhm.
They're going to start looking for a new job.
Yes.
And I didn't want that to happen. So I made a promise with every single one of those employees. I said, as people convert to the new product and we have to reduce staff, I will give you as much notice as the first thing I'll do is give you as much notice as possible to
Mhm,
allow you ample time to find another job internally.
mhm,
Number two, if you tell me today that you're interested in learning some of the newer technology so that you can move from the current product to the upgraded products and still stay with the company, I'll gladly make that happen for you as part of your professional development,
mhm.
as part of your professional development
Yeah.
curriculum here at the organization. I said the third thing I'm going to do is if in fact you make the decision that you don't want to stay at the organization, I will work with you to help you find a job on the outside of the company.
Mhm,
Either way, I've got your back.
mhm,
And either way, you will not be surprised when I say to you, great, it's unfortunate, but we're at this point where we've now lost two more customers. We've
mhm,
migrated them over. We're going to not need your services in 90 days.
mm,
So let's figure out a plan for you to keep you in your role.
mhm,
Here's what was very surprising to me. Number one, we had zero individuals quit
mm,
before I gave them their notice of when they might be departing.
mm,
Zero. The second thing is, for a 2 year period that I ran that group, they had the highest employee satisfaction in the entire organization.
mm,
Now, this was a team that knew their jobs were going away,
mm,
yet they had the highest employee satisfaction of any other group in a 20,000 person company.
mm,
That was pretty amazing. I didn't I didn't do it for that. I did it for them. They served a value to me and the organization. And if we lost them too early, it would make it harder for us to service those customers or even upsell those customers to the newer technology.
mm.
So the results of the employee survey were just to me astonishing because those people really believed in what I was doing with them.
Yes.
And not only that, I they also understood not just I was had empathy, but I also had compassion towards their situation.
Mm,
And I could understand the situation that they were in.
mm.
So that's a perfect example that kind of specific to empathy, um, but it's still important.
Mm, mm, mm. Interesting.
Sorry about that bark in the background.
Yeah,
Sorry about that bark in the background.
no problem, no problem. I mean, so your story just shows that I mean, there's a direct correlation between empathy and employee satisfaction. And so from what I keep learning from your principles or your pillars, setting pillars leads to certain outcomes, right? You can talk about trust without talking about integrity. You can talk about employee satisfaction without talking about empathy, and the likes. And it's very insightful and very, very, very interesting. So I want to ask more personal questions, right? What keeps you motivated to inspire and develop others? You've been doing this for 30 plus years. What keeps you motivated to inspire and develop others?
Seeing people I've worked with become successful and happy.
Mm, mm,
I'm a firm believer that if you're not happy in what you're doing, you need to move and do something else. And
mm,
if you're on my team or one of my teams and come to me and say, I'm not happy, I'm going to help you either become happy, remove the roadblocks, or help you find a role that would make you happy.
Mm,
Life is too short not to be enjoying what you're doing.
mm,
So to me,
true.
it's not about how much money somebody makes, it's how satisfied they feel with their life
Mm,
and how happy are they with their what they're doing in the in quote the business world in order to help others. In the world that I live in, which is healthcare, obviously health outcomes is critical to that.
mm,
But the reality is, if you still have to be happy with what you're doing and happy with yourself.
mm,
And so that motivates me. It motivates me, and I love doing it, and I have fun. One of the pillars is humor. I
mm,
love to have fun,
mm,
and I've done some very humorous things with. And there's a couple, at least one example in the book. But if you're not having fun,
mm,
and you're not able, if you're have an inability to laugh at what you're doing when something is funny, then again, you're wrapped way too tight,
mm,
and that stress and that tightness will only impact your ability to deliver.
mm, mm. So let me ask a follow-up question to this. Have you always had a leader above you model this kind of leadership, and or have you always had? Is there a time where you've had leaders above you that did not model the kind of leadership that you so much desire?
So first, let me handle the positive side of that. I've worked for some great leaders who really resonate in terms of my six pillars.
Okay.
But I've also had managers that didn't have some of those and some of those values.
Mm,
I did have some leaders who didn't care about employees. They only cared about themselves. I did unfortunately have leaders who lacked integrity.
mm,
Uh, the good news is there weren't many of them. There were
mm,
not many of them. That's the good news. The bad news is it doesn't take many to make you unhappy with what you're doing and what you're seeing happening around you. So I have had both, but thank God most of them have been great leaders,
mm,
and very personable and very approachable.
mm,
One of the things that I think is important about leadership is there are leaders who are leaders as soon as they come into the office and open the door and go into their office.
mhm,
Outside of their office, they don't interact with people,
mm,
they don't talk to them. I'm a firm believer that if I'm a leader 24/7.
mm,
And so when I get out of my car in the parking lot, if you're walking across the parking lot, you and I are going to have a conversation. Whether you like it or not, I'm going to engage you and ask you, how's your day?
mm,
Even though your day's just starting. Why waste that valuable time between the parking lot, the front door, and the elevator
mm,
to not engage somebody in some level of communication?
mm,
I also know of a leader, an executive leader, that used to take the freight elevator to their office. Well, the freight elevator is not where the employees travel.
mm,
They travel in the regular elevator.
mm,
And so you need to, as a leader, you need to be with your people.
connection.
And if you're not with your people, correct, you're not bringing them together.
Mm, mm. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. I like the idea of you're a leader 24/7. I mean, because some people think that leadership is a role that they play. So when they come to the office, they act like a leader. But every other places they don't rise to the occasion of leadership, right? And I'm so glad you mentioned that thought. You mentioned
But let me just clarify one thing.
yes.
I may be a leader 24/7, but at home, my wife is in charge.
I like that. I like that. And leadership is not really about position, right? As much as it's about influence, right? So if your wife is in charge, it doesn't mean you are not a leader. It means you are both working together to keep the home together, to get everything and get all the acts together. And so that's highly influential about you. And there's something interesting you mentioned about having fun leading and having fun working. And so that will bring me to the question of humor, right? You mentioned that humor is one of the pillars of successful leadership. What role does humor play in leadership, especially during challenges?
So I use humor. I'm not a stand-up comedian, but I use humor when stress is high and people are worried. And I use it in a way to sometimes break the ice
Mm,
and to get people to think about the world's not that serious. One phrase I use at work all the time:
mm,
nobody is going to die if we don't get this done today. We are not performing open heart surgery.
mm,
That's not what we do.
mm,
So there is nothing that urgent that we can't sit down and work through collaboratively what that problem might be and what solutions there are.
mm,
I think all too often people want to just make a decision and move on
mm,
without thinking of the repercussions down the road,
mm,
whether it be for that customer, another customer, or for an employee, or for whatever the situation may be.
mm,
And so I'm absolutely a firm believer in saying, okay, let's just step back, let's take a deep breath, and let's think about it.
mm,
And if I can use humor to do that and give them an example of something, I would certainly do that.
mm.
And then other times, if we're out having food and drink or whatever, I just like to have fun. And so the game's on at that point.
I like to have fun. The world is not that serious. I like that. Thanks. Thanks for sharing that perspective. I asked you two last questions. One is a question I always like to ask every of my guests on my podcast, and that's what book has had a tremendous impact in shaping your leadership journey today?
I would I would guess The Seven Habits of Highly Successful People is one that ranks up at the top.
Mm,
And a lot of people ask me that question, and that's the book I think that if I was to go to my shelf, it probably has the more pages kind of turned on the top corner for
yeah,
future reference, right?
references. Yeah.
Um, that's that's probably the one I use most.
Mm,
There are others, but that one's probably much like my book, foundational in nature, and really tells you, if you want to be this person, this is what they did.
interesting.
I'm a believer that when you read a business book, if you try to implement the entire book, you may fail
Mm,
because what was successful for me may not be successful for you.
true.
For let's use humor as an example.
Mm,
If you have no sense of humor and you don't even like people when they however, you could probably do something close to that without actually um, being humorous, if that
mm.
makes any sense.
Yeah. Yes. 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 Totally. Totally makes sense. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jim. It's been interesting having this conversation with you. I've learned pretty much a lot, and I've been taking notes, taking a lot of notes that I would fall back on to just review this session and then imbibe some of the concepts and pillars that you mentioned. So thank you so much for the time. I'm going to ask you this last question, and it's just about telling us what you are currently working on, and then you would like everyone listening to this podcast to stay glued at what you are working on. Do you want to share a bit of what you're working on this year that you want people to be aware of?
So my goal for this year is to take my message on the road and get in front of more people, more live audiences, whether that be at conferences or corporations. That's my goal, probably to start building that between 2025 and 2026,
Mm,
and further develop, because I think there's probably some additional pillars. I'm not going to say today that I'm writing a second book on this yet,
mm,
but I've already been asked the question, and I've started to formulate where would I take this next?
mm,
Would I take it to four additional pillars, making it 10? Would I take it to 15?
mm.
And I haven't hit that number yet, so I'm not sure what book will be the second book.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of time to write a lot of time to write a book
Mm,
and to do it well.
mm.
So I think taking the message out will be the biggest thing over the next 12 to 24 months.
Right. Yeah. So how do people connect with you?
They can connect with me through my website, www.jimcarlough.com. That's JIMCARLOUGH.com. They can call me at area +1, a US number, 972-838-0060, or they can email me at jim@jimcarlough.com.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll sure add all of this information to the show notes on this particular episode of the podcast. I want to really thank you, Jim, for taking out time to speak with me and to share some of your insights and thoughts around the 6 pillars of effective leadership. It's been worth it talking to you, and I'll surely keep in touch as well. Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate it.
And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a lot. All right. Well, this is where we'll wrap up on today's episode. I hope we'll do more episode that add values to our listeners subsequently. Thank you so much for my guest, Jim, and thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you so much, audience, and everyone who has listened to this podcast. I appreciate you. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye, Jim.
Have a good day.